Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 573, and I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. So, just a quick preview for the rest of the week. On today's show, I have news on Julian Assange, the war in Ukraine, and a few stories from around the Middle East. And then on Friday's show, I'll have another show. I'll have a very special guest returning to that show. And then I will talk about the war in Gaza on Friday's episode. So just a little breakdown of what to expect for the rest of the week. We have done or will put out 5 shows this week at Conflicts of Interest. Already I've had Connor Freeman and Matthew Ho on the show. So a really big week for the show. Of course, it's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. You can subscribe to the video version of the show at YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee, and it's up anywhere you listen to audio podcasts. Just be sure you subscribe to the show so you don't miss an episode. And then you can also follow the show and share out the show by following me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. All right, first up in the news today, Biden says he's considering dropping charges against Julian Assange. So this is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com on April 10th. President Biden on Wednesday said he's considering a request from Australia to drop the charges against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who has been targeted for exposing U.S. war crimes through standard journalism. The Australian government has recently stepped up its pressure on the Biden administration to end its persecution of Assange, who is an Australian citizen. When asked about the Australian request, Biden said, "We're considering it." The Department of Justice first indicted Assange under the Espionage Act during the Trump administration in 2019, leading to his arrest at the Ecuadorian embassy in London and imprisonment in Belmarsh prison, where he's being held today. That is known as the UK's version of Guantanamo Bay because that's where they hold all their most serious offenders. And of course, Assange is just subjected to that cruel punishment because they want to send a message. They want to punish him for doing journalism and exposing Western war crimes. So Assange faces 17 counts of espionage and 1 count of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion for publishing documents leaked to WikiLeaks by former Army Private Chelsea Manning in 2010. Publishing classified documents obtained by his source is a standard journalistic practice, and if Assange is convicted, it would set a great precedent for press freedom in the U.S. and around the world, especially because, Assange wasn't in the U.S. when he did this. He's not an American citizen, and so this basically says to any human being on this earth, if you publish documents about the American government that they find embarrassing, that they will do whatever they can to round you up and have you thrown in prison for years and years, if not, put away for the rest of your life, because they want to give Assange 175 years. So Biden's remarks came after London's High Court demanded that Assange might have a chance at a limited appeal of the British Home Security's Secretary's decision to extradite him to the U.S., but the U.S. government has a chance to avoid the appeals if it offers assurances to satisfy the court. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that the U.S. might be seeking a plea deal for Assange, although his legal team denied that the U.S. government was looking for anything less than the full charge. A plea deal is considered to be a bad precedent as it will criminalize the journalist-source relationship. WikiLeaks has been asking Americans to put pressure on the Biden administration to stop its pursuit of Assange by contacting their House representatives and telling them to support H-Res number 934, a bill introduced by Representative Paul Gosar, and it calls for the U.S. to drop charges against Assange. Click here to find out if you're a representative or call the House switchboard at 202-224-3121 and tell them to support the resolution to protect the First Amendment and press freedom. And look, making those calls today is probably more important than just on an average Thursday or Friday, because, Assange is in the news. And if Biden is saying this, then especially if you have a Democratic representative right now, I would give them a call and say, like, hey, this is going to give the president the support he needs to get done what he wants to do, and make this, sound like that. That way they actually want to do it, because, they're not really concerned about press freedom or anything like that in the Congress, but they are concerned about politics and how it looks and helping out the president if they're a Democrat. So we can make that kind of pitch. All right, next up here. U.S. announces $138 million Hawk air defense deal for Ukraine. The State Department on Tuesday announced an emergency foreign military sale to Ukraine worth 138 million. That's 138 million worth of equipment to maintain and upgrade its Hawk air defense systems. The deal is being paid for by U.S. military aid to Ukraine that was included in its annual military spending bill, which President Biden signed into law last month. The bill gave Ukraine $300 million in foreign military financing, the State Department program that gives foreign governments money to buy U.S.-made weapons. The deal for the Hawk air defense systems come as Russia is stepping up its missile and drone strikes against infrastructure across Ukraine. Russia's strikes have been much more effective as Moscow has better intelligence and is finding gaps in Ukraine's air defense systems, which have been significantly depleted. President Biden is still struggling to secure $60 billion. He is seeking to fund the proxy war in Ukraine for another year. The Senate passed a $95 billion foreign military aid bill that includes funding for Ukraine, but it has been held up in the House. In a desperate move to get more weapons to Ukraine, the Biden administration announced a new $300 million package last month that was taken directly from U.S. stockpiles. The administration has previously said it was out of money for such transfers, but it claimed it found the money in the U.S. Army budget savings, which is laughable because the Pentagon also says they have a $300 million procurement in deficit, $10 billion deficit, $10 billion deficit when it comes to the funds they need to require to procure more weapons to replenish the ones sent to Ukraine. So obviously they didn't free up this $300 million. If anything, this $300 million should have been, go to replenish the weapons that the U.S. needs in their own stockpiles, not to go to Ukraine. The $300 million package includes more cluster bombs, which are notorious for maiming and killing civilians. Due to their indiscriminate nature, cluster bombs are banned by more than 100 countries, but Biden began pouring them into Ukraine last year, and is likely illegal and against U.S. law as well. So in addition to sending those weapons, the U.S. is sending some small arms seized from the Middle East. I wrote this one up for the Libertarian Institute on April 9th. U.S. Central Command reported it has sent thousands of small arms and rocket launchers to Ukraine that it seized in the Middle East. The move comes as the White House is desperately seeking arms to send to Ukraine, as Congress is yet to approve President Joe Biden's $61 billion funding package for Ukraine. CENTCOM announced the transfer on Tuesday, saying it was completed last week. On April 4th, 2024, the U.S. government transferred over 5,000 AK-47 machine gun sniper rifles, RPGs, and over 500,000 rounds of 7.62 millimeter ammunition to the Ukrainian armed forces. This constitutes enough material to equip one Ukrainian brigade with small arms rifles. The weapons will help Ukraine defend against Russia's invasion. Washington claims it seized the weapons that Iran was transferring to Yemen. The U.S. has asserted for nearly a decade that Yemen's ruling Houthis operate as a proxy of Iran. However, the Houthis act independently of Tehran, and Washington's claims that Iran is Yemen's primary arms supplier have been largely debunked. The shipment of a few thousand arms to Ukraine demonstrates the White House's desperate attempts to ship arms to Ukraine without additional funding approved by Congress. The Biden administration has demanded for over 6 months that lawmakers pass a $61 billion funding bill to support the ongoing proxy war in Ukraine. The effort to pass the bill was delayed when the White House attempted to package aid for Ukraine with $14 billion in military assistance for Israel and immigration reform. A $95 billion foreign aid bill passed the Senate earlier this year, but remains stalled in the House. The White House has used some questionable accounting tactics to send additional arms to Ukraine. Last summer, the Department of Defense claimed to have uncovered a multi-billion-dollar accounting error that freed up over $6 billion in funds to arm Ukraine. And of course, now there's a $10 billion deficit in the ability to replenish American arms depots from the weapons sent to Ukraine. And yet we're still using funds to send, spending more money to send weapons to Ukraine. So This is quite shocking. Biden administration has undercounted Ukraine spending by $14 billion. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. The Biden administration has admitted that it massively undercounted what it has spent on the proxy war in Ukraine, the American Conservative reported on Tuesday. The report said that the White House Office of Budget Management, that's OMB, had previously estimated the U.S. had spent over $111 billion on the war. For over a year, a group of members of Congress has pressed the OMB to figure out the real number recently found that was $125 billion, $14 billion more than the White House has previously claimed. In a letter sent to the director of OMB on Tuesday, Senator J.D. Vance, Republican from Ohio, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, and 15 other members of Congress said they now have confirmation from the OMB that the total Ukrainian spending figure is significantly higher than the administration has ever admitted. The lawmakers also asked OMB Director Solandra Young to answer a series of questions about U.S. spending on the proxy war and gave her a deadline of April 30th. The Biden administration also still has around $4 billion that could potentially be spent on Ukraine aid in the form of Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows U.S. weapons to be sent straight from the Pentagon stockpiles. The $4 billion from funds that became available after the Pentagon claimed an accounting error freed up additional spending on the proxy war, but the Pentagon hasn't used the $4 billion in remaining PDA funds because it says there is no money to replenish the weapons after they are sent to Ukraine. But the U.S. has been finding ways to arm Ukraine anyways. And so previously, another one, the accounting tricks the Biden administration used is when the Congress passed a temporary funding bill in, I believe, November. They said, well, that's good enough for us. And this $300 billion that would be in the full spending bill, now we could go ahead and use that money to arm Ukraine. So they're getting very, very clever, and it's probably illegal how they're, making these moves to arm Ukraine. All right, next up here. German troops arrive in Lithuania for first permanent deployment since World War II. On Monday, Germany began deploying troops to Lithuania, where they will be stationed permanently, marking the first deployment of this kind for the German military since World War II. Only 24 German soldiers have arrived in Lithuania so far, and the force will increase to 4,800 by 2027. Germany already leads a NATO deployment in Lithuania with 1,000 troops, but the new forces will be labeled as permanent. So Defense Minister of Germany, Boris Pistorius, said this is the first time that we have permanently stationed a unit outside of Germany. And he said the deployment was an important day for the German army. And it's, this was kind of humorous, especially on social media, where you have the West and NATO bragging about this deployment and saying it's the first German deployment to Lithuania since World War II. And obviously they don't address there the issue with that, of course, is the last time that the German military was permanently deployed to Lithuania, they were Nazis. And so this is obviously, if they had mentioned that part of the story, it would make a lot more sense of why these deployments are seen as so provocative by Russia. But of course they leave that out. All right, on the actual battlefield in Ukraine here, Ukrainian drone hit Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. On Sunday, a Ukrainian drone struck the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, or ZMPP, which is located in southeastern Ukraine and has been under Russian control since February 2022. In a really wild, if you guys want to go back to the pretty early days of the show, I can't remember exactly what episode it is, but myself and Will Porter actually were, sitting watching live streams of the war, and we watched the Russian forces roll up to and enter the opening, I guess. It's a pretty large facility. It's not like you could actually see the Russian tanks roll up to the cooling towers or anything like that. But, on the outskirts of the ZMPP facility, they have all these administrative buildings and everything like that. And, early in the war, it was actually just on live stream. You could watch as the Russian military rolled up and there's a little exchange of fire at the ZMPP and everything like that. So now Russia holds it. The plant official said there was no serious damage in the attack and the radiation levels were normal. Russia's state nuclear agency said that 3 people were wounded in the attack. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, which is the international watchdog and has inspectors at the plant, confirmed the drone attack. The IAEA experts confirmed the physical impact of the drone attacks at the ZMPP today. IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi condemned the attacks. He said this is a clear violation of the basic principles for protecting Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Such reckless attacks significantly increase the risk of major nuclear accident and must cease immediately. The ZMPP is located on the south bank of the Dnieper River. Ukraine controls the territory across the river. The plant also has come under Ukrainian shelling throughout the war. Ukrainian forces have launched several failed attempts to retake the plant. A report from the Times revealed that the U.S. backed one of these attempts in October of 2022 when 600 Ukrainian commandos tried to cross the river. The U.S. supported the raid by providing targeting data to Ukraine so it could use U.S.-provided HIMARS rocket systems, which hit Russian positions near the southern bank on the southern bank of the Dnieper River near the ZMPP. So, to just talk about how involved and how many risks the U.S. is willing to take. They're willing to help the Ukrainians shell a nuclear power plant, the largest one in Europe, in fact. All right, next up here, Russia repels major drone attack on military base. I wrote this one on April 7th. And so basically what happened last Friday, the Ukrainians claimed they launched about 50 drones at a major Russian airbase located in southern Russia. I guess you would describe it as maybe east of Donetsk, on the way to, I think it's Leningrad or Stalingrad. So then on Friday, Russia had said that wasn't the case. On Monday, we got satellite imagery out that showed there was no damage to the airbase, and it looks like Russia was able to intercept the attack and prevent it. All right, next up here, this one from Date to Camp, antiwar.com. U.S. thinks Iranian retaliation against Israel is imminent. The U.S. and its allies believe Iranian retaliation for the Israeli bombing of Iran's consulate in Syria is imminent, Bloomberg reported on Wednesday. Sources told Bloomberg that based on U.S. and Israeli intelligence, Iran or its allies in the region could launch a major missile or drone attack on military and government targets inside of Israel in the coming days. Axios reported something similar, saying Israel is expecting a direct Iranian attack on its territory launched from Iranian soil. Israeli sources told the outlet that Israel would respond by launching direct attacks on Iran, which would likely require U.S. support. A major Iranian response would be exactly what Israel wants, as it appears to be trying to provoke a wider regional war to get the U.S. involved directly. The Axios report said the U.S. top military commander in the Middle East, General Eric Kurilla, is due to visit Israel on Thursday to coordinate the potential Iranian attack. President Biden signaled the U.S. would directly intervene if Iran attacks Israel in a warning to Tehran he issued on Wednesday. So Biden said, "We also want to address the Iranian threat to launch they are threatening to launch a significant attack in Israel. As I told Prime Minister Netanyahu, our commitment to Israel's security against these threats from Iran and its proxies is ironclad. Let me say again, ironclad. We're going to do all we can to protect Israel's security." And this, I thought, was a really bold and stupid statement for Biden to publicly make. Now, this could be U.S. policy, and I do think it would be wise, if this is what the U.S. is planning on doing, to communicate this to the Iranians. You don't want a case of miscommunication where the Iranians believe that what the Americans are planning to do is that they would not respond to an Iranian attack. The Americans think Israel went too far, and so they're going to let basically Iran give Israel a bloody nose without responding to maybe help teach Israel a lesson a little bit. And if you're not going to allow that, I think you should communicate that to the Iranians. At the same time, I think making these statements publicly is very foolish. For one, I think it sends a bad signal to the rest of the world. What Israel did here was a major violation of international norms and how diplomatic buildings are treated in sovereign territory and everything like that. I mean, this was effectively not only a declaration of war on Iran, but also Syria as well. And so, if I were Biden, I would not have come out and made these statements so publicly. Now, I have gotten asked quite a few times what I think is going to happen, what the Iranians are going to do in response. And a part of me, I think that the Iranians will want to do a very major response here. They've basically taken blow after blow from the Americans and the Israelis in Lebanon, in Syria, assassinations within Iran, the assassination of Soleimani from Israel and the West for a very long time now, but particularly, during the Trump and Biden administrations, it has been very frequently that the Iranians have had to take one on the chin and essentially give a very muted response. And so, because the Israeli escalation was so major, I think for the Iranians, they're going to feel that they look significantly weak if they don't issue a major response. I also think that they may see an issue with having to compare their actions to the actions, particularly of the Houthis in Yemen, who have sustained, a few hundred Western airstrikes in support of Gaza. And so, why won't the Iranians fight back? Well, there's good reasons, of course. Yemen has largely already been destroyed by a 7-8 year long Saudi bombing campaign in the country, where Iran, quite frankly, has a lot to lose. It's a somewhat modern country, right? A lot of modern infrastructure. Of course, they've been hampered by U.S. sanctions. It's not that, the standard of living is maybe equivalent to something in Europe, but still, this is a fairly modern country. And if they sustain a massive missile barrage from Israel, it's going to take hundreds of billions of dollars probably to repair and make everything whole. And so there's a lot to lose in Iran from picking a major fight with Israel here. And so I've been thinking about this a lot, and I read a comment today from Elijah Magnier, who I often think, especially when it comes to what the mood, temperature, and thoughts are in Iran, is a very, very astute observer of the region. And what Elijah said is that Iran is planning to basically do something in kind, which will be to kill 7 Israelis and Israelis that Iran feels are, I don't know if equivalent is the right word, but at least, of similar stature and rank to the Iranians killed in Syria, and they will conduct these assassinations. I'm guessing some of them will occur either on American or Israeli embassies in the Middle East, and this will be Iran's way of issuing a serious response that stops short of conducting a direct attack in Israel that would provoke American involvement. I think it would be very hard for Biden to look at this and then say, okay, well, the Iranians went so far, we're going to war. If they just assassinate, conduct basically a very equal attack. All right, next up here, this one from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. 8 killed as Israel strikes across southern Lebanon. So strikes by Israeli forces continue to escalate on Friday into Saturday, with towns in southern Lebanon experienced heavy shelling and airstrikes targeting homes and buildings across the area. 8 were estimated to have been killed in the attack. But that's not all the killing that Israel is doing in Lebanon. Next up here, Israel kills Hezbollah commander, 3 others in airstrike on southern Lebanon house. This one from April 8th. At least 4 people were killed and unspecified number of others wounded when Israel carried out an airstrike against an occupied house in southern Lebanon. Among those kills was the leader of Hezbollah's Radwan force. The commander was identified as Ali Ahmed Hassan, and Hezbollah said he was carrying out his jihadist duties at the time of his death. The Radwan force is Hezbollah's elite commando unit. A second Hezbollah man was slain, identified as a local figure, Abbas Jafar, and a third Hezbollah figure remains unidentified, and a fourth victim remains unidentified. The airstrikes targeted an occupied house in a residential community, badly damaged many surrounding homes. More than a dozen families were said to have lost their homes in the incident. Israeli aircraft were reported to target Ramina and another area with machine gun fire, and no casualties were reported from those attacks. And so a third story here by Jason Ditz on Israeli actions in Lebanon. Mossad suspected as U.S.-sanctioned Hamas financier found murdered near Beirut. In 2019, the U.S. sanctioned a Lebanese man, Mohammed Soror, on accusations that he funneled tens of millions of dollars from Iran's Quds force to the Qassam Brigades, the armed wing of Hamas. Yesterday, he was found murdered in a villa in Beit Mary near Beirut after having gone missing for nearly a week. Soror was shot more than 5 times and was found in possession of an undisclosed sum of money, which the killers did not take. The immediate suspicion is that he was assassinated by the Israeli Mossad. The villa he was found in was reported to be rented by an unnamed tenant who had simply disappeared after the killings. The body shows signs of torture, including having been shot in both hands and both feet. The alleged, Hamas financier was employed in a currency exchange shop in Beit Mary and worked for Hezbollah's money transfer service. He reported to be working with Hezbollah operatives to see that the money reached the Qassam Brigades. All right, so 2 more stories here. One on Syria. This again from Jason Ditz. Faction fight in southwest Syria after bombing kills at least 20. So a roadside bombing in southwest Syria town on Saturday night killed at least 8 children. The incident was in the Dara region, and the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights accused pro-government militias of planting the bomb in a failed assassination attempt. Speculation about which group was behind the bombing erupted on Sunday into fighting in the town and left 20 dead, including 12 fighters from 2 rival factions, accusing one another of the bombing. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, while providing useful information on casualties, is known to be skewed towards the anti-Assad perspective, so blaming pro-government fighters must be taken with a grain of salt. One of the factions is led by a former member of the Syrian State Security Agency, which was accused of planting the device, and while denying this, his rival group went after him, torching his home and killing women and 2 children in his family. The rival factions, led by a former ISIS member, stormed in and after going after the home started a major fight which raged for a part of Sunday. Dara was one of the first regions to experience unrest during the start of the Syrian civil war. They had a presence by Islamic militants before a deal was brokered, which could see the militants relocated to Idlib and left Dara only loosely controlled. With fears that ISIS might be making a recovery, it is only natural that Dara would be a target for them, and while they are one of the immediate suspects for the bombing on Saturday, it seems the former ISIS member used his armed faction to go after his rival instead. Local police were quick to be blamed for an unnamed group of terrorists for the bombing, though the police don't appear to have been involved in today's clashes. As we saw from today, armed factions remain influential in Dara. All right, and then last up here is just a overall report on ISIS from the last year from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. U.S. says it conducted 94 missions against ISIS in Iraq and Syria this year. So according to CENTCOM, the U.S. and its partner forces in Iraq and Syria conducted 94 operations against ISIS in the first 3 months of this year. CENTCOM said it involved in 66 operations with the Iraqi government forces and 28 operations with the Kurdish-led SDF in Syria. The missions resulted in the killing of 18 alleged ISIS operatives and the detainment of 36 others. ISIS holds no significant territory in either Iraq or Syria, and the remnants of the group operate in the rural areas. The fight against ISIS is what the U.S. and its uses as its excuse to stay in both countries, but the presence is more about countering Iran and its allies, and actually, particularly in Syria, the U.S. presence in that country prevents there from being a real state government and security service and allows ISIS to continue to fester. According to the official numbers, the U.S. has about 2,500 troops in Iraq and 900 in Syria. The update on U.S. operations against ISIS comes after Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani called for the U.S. to leave his country and said that the Iraqi security forces can handle ISIS remnants on their own, but the U.S. entered talks with the al-Sudani government about potential withdrawal, but appears determined to stay in the country. And so I think we're just, dangling a little, we'll talk to you about this in front of the Iraqi government, hoping that they will back off on their demands for the U.S. to leave immediately. My guess is that the U.S. stays in Iraq for a good time to come. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. Again, we'll be back with another episode tomorrow.